wasteland, and he's standing there in the middle of what should have been fertile territory. And the agnostic Mark Twain said, no one can stand here and say these prophecies have not been fulfilled. And Mark Twain was so impressed over the prophecies about how barren God was going to turn the land and how he was going to make it a place where few people would want to live. And indeed, there was a point in time in the 1700s where there perhaps were no more than 25,000 people in the whole of the land. Then you have this man who is so well known in Israel. His name is Theodore Herzl. He's near George Washington, considered the father of modern Israel. And he had a vision for the Jews to return to the land. And he used his influence to get wealthy Jews to buy up land. They didn't steal it, they didn't go over there and take it, they bought it. And they established communal farms. They had to, because one person, a couple, couldn't just simply go over there and start farming because the swamps had to be drained, malaria-infested swamps, and the desert land, and opening irrigation, and all sorts of things that had to be done. And so collectively they started these farms. And the rest is history, which we're going to talk about. In Isaiah 35:10 we read, the ransomed of the Lord will return and come with joyful shouting to Zion. And that is precisely what is happening today. When Israel was established in 1948, one of the first things they did was bring the body of Theodore Herzl, and they buried it on a mountain at Jerusalem, which is called Mount Herzl. And this is where Israel has its national cemetery. This is their Arlington, and his grave is the centerpiece there. In the scriptures we read from Ezekiel also, I'm going to resettle you in your towns. The ruins are going to be rebuilt. The desolate land is going to be cultivated in the sight of all that pass through it. And they'll say, this land that was laid waste has become like the Garden of Eden. The cities that were lying in ruins, desolate and destroyed, are now fortified and inhabited. Then the nations around you will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt what was destroyed and have replanted what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. And if you want to know who to blame today for Israel being back, it's God. And he makes it clear, I've done it. It's my hand. After 2,000 years of exile, every one of us here tonight is a witness to the rebirth of the nation of Israel, just as God stated in the scriptures. Israel has experienced what no other nation in history has ever experienced. That is, that after 2,000 years of exile, they go back to the same land from which they were run off by the Romans, with their culture, their religion, and their language still intact. Though the Jews were dispersed throughout the world, God preserved the people, the land, and the Temple Mount. We're going to be talking about that throughout this conference and its importance. There are nearly as many Jews living in Israel today as in all other parts of the world. And there is a move on still for Jews to go to Israel, and it's happening every single day. The great change that came upon that land over there took place, as I had that list up here of all those that occupied the land. The great change came at the end when Great Britain conquered that section of real estate from the Turks. And they had a mandate in 1917, right after World War I, from the League of Nations. And the 400-year rule of the Turks, the same country of Turkey we're talking about and know about today, 400 years they ruled the Holy Land. It was a desolate, horrible place during those 400 years. But everything began to change when Great Britain captured the land. That took place on the first day of Hanukkah in December 1917, and Jerusalem, the city, fell to General Allenby, who was one of the great heroes of World War I. One of the great battles that General Allenby fought that brought victory to the British Army and defeated the Turks was in the plains of Armageddon. And of course, the Bible tells us that Armageddon will be the site of the last battle to be fought on earth. Will be fought in Israel, right here where you're looking today. You can see it as a beautiful area filled with farms and kibbutzim. This is the breadbasket of Israel today, the Jezreel Valley. You can see up here on the maps, this is the original plan set forth by the British for the Jewish state. They wanted to give this entire territory to make it a Jewish homeland. And then you can see over here the plan that was finalized by the United Nations in 1947. And what you see here in the gold color, that would be the new state of Israel. This was to be Arab or Palestinian, what is in the dark brown. And what you see over here from this area all the way over here, that is now the country of Jordan. And the British divided that up because British needed oil, and they set up relationships with the Arabs for that purpose, and gave about half of the Jewish land that was described originally. We know that 6 million Jews perished during the Holocaust in World War II. That was a great incentive for the Jews to want to go there, as Hitler and his henchmen tried to carry out what they called the Jewish solution, which was to kill all the Jews. That happened on one other occasion where God prevented it, and that is recorded in the book of Esther. After the defeat of the Nazis in 1945, the gates of the death camps were open, but many of the Jews had no place to go, and Britain had closed off immigration to the Jews. And so they wanted to go to Israel, but they were not allowed. They were turned back. They were turned back from the shores of the United States. They were turned back from most of the world. And they languished until finally they were allowed, many of them, to go and be part of the development of Israel. The United Nations voted to partition Palestine into 2 states on November 29th, 1947. And again, what you see in the white here was to be the Jewish state. And what you see here in this greenish color, this was to be the Palestinian state. And so when you hear today talk about let's develop a Palestinian state, they were offered back in 1947 and the Jews agreed to it. A Palestinian state. But the Palestinians, the Arabs, rejected this breaking up of their land. They wanted it all, and they still want it all, which is why there is no peace. On May the 14th, 1948, Israel officially became a nation. David Ben-Gurion, pictured here, the first prime minister. And he led them through this whole process of becoming a state. He read the proclamation that Israel was a state, and immediately you see this note up here that was written by President Harry Truman. And he's declaring that the United States is recognizing, and he wasn't sure what they were going to call it. And so you see here that he had a Jewish state written in there, and then scratched it out when he knew that they were going to call it the State of Israel. And very interestingly, this took place 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion's announcement in Tel Aviv. And he announced America's support for the Jewish nation. 1 year later, the chief rabbi in Israel came to the White House And he said to Truman, and this is recorded in his memoirs, he said, God put you in your mother's womb so that you could be the instrument to bring about the rebirth of Israel after 2,000 years. And according to those memoirs, when Truman heard those words, he wept. And it's just quite amazing how the United States, from 11 minutes after the State of Israel was established, has been, up to this point, a friend of Israel. And I believe that God's blessing on our country today is much dependent upon our support of the State of Israel. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. After 1900 years of exile, Israel became a nation once more. Immediately they were set upon by these Arab nations. Jordan came in with their armies, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt. All these armies descended in 1948. There were 100 million Arabs or Muslims living around Israel. Their population in 1948 was 600,000. And yet Israel defeated them on July the 18th. A very brief war, and they won their independence. But as a direct result of that war in 1948, they lost the Old City. They were forced to flee the Old City. And they were no longer allowed to pray at their most holy site. This is a wall called the Western Wall, or the Kotel. We'll look at it in a minute. But this is part of the Temple Mount structure. And the Jews have gone there over the centuries to pray, but they were forbidden to do that after Jordan took over in 1948. The entire Jewish quarter of the Old City was destroyed by the Jordanians, and they destroyed the most precious synagogue that the Jews had at that time in the Old City, in the Jewish quarter, and that has just been rebuilt. And that is an amazing thing, because there is a Jewish rabbi who stated, when this building is built for the third time, that then the temple will be rebuilt and the Messiah will come. And it's interesting to see that, because this is the third Herva synagogue. 1967 war, and war has followed war in Israel. Israel was able to capture the Sinai and the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, the Old City, and even the Golan Heights up in Syria. And this is what all the fuss and feathers is about today. Because Israel is told they must go back to the 1967 borders. President Obama has made that clear, and they must give up all this territory that was won in 1967. Well, they've given up the vast majority of it when they gave the Sinai back to Egypt. And now do you realize, and I'll say something about this in just a little bit, that with what's going on in Egypt today, they're talking about doing away with the Camp David peace treaty and going back to a state of war with Israel. The Jews liberated their Kotel, their Western Wall, and the Temple Mount. And it just so happened that the Temple Mount, as we see it there today, the Dome of the Rock and so forth. Here, by the way, is the Western Wall. It's good you can see in this picture how close the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is to the temple, and why it's so important. You see the Jews assembled there praying almost immediately from the time it was taken. And but this is controlled today by the Muslims, because Moshe Dayan, the great Israeli general at that time, decided that the Jews should not bother the Muslims up there. Now, let me change subjects very quickly and talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. We talked about how the temple was destroyed in the year 70 AD. And just as the temple was about to be destroyed, the